Their eggs on.
All right, let's leave it there. I'm sure we'll discuss it again within the next 24 hours. Is it acceptable for young people to be offered unpaid internships that last longer than 1 month? Well, one peer and former Paralympian thinks it isn't. He's brought forward a bill which, if it became law, would mean people have to be paid at least the minimum wage for any work beyond 4 weeks. The Conservative peer, Christopher Holmes, said unpaid internships are a stain on our society, a drain on social mobility and desperately Dickensian. They are something of the past that I believe should be firmly committed to that past. The peer has tried to get this legislation onto the statute books before, and here he is speaking in the Lords last year.
That nation will in no sense be working for everybody while we still have the perpetuation of pathways of privilege having nothing to do with merit, nothing to do with talent, pathways of privilege where people are able to get unpaid work opportunities on the basis of being fortunate enough through family funding or indeed the family black book.
Well, that was Christopher Holmes there, and he joins us here now. And we're also joined from Edinburgh by Charlie Peters, who is a writer and student. Welcome to both of you. Chris, first of all, we've been here before. It's very well intentioned. But will this legislation actually change anything?
I hope it will bring clarity to this area. If somebody's doing work, I believe in 21st century Britain, they should be paid for that work.
What do you think, Charlie? I mean, you've done unpaid internships in the past. It seems a fairly logical principle to be paid for it.
It certainly does, but I mean, unpaid internships allow employers to take a chance on someone who might not typically work in that area, especially in businesses and areas of work where businesses tend to be more cash-strapped, such as charity and journalism and media. A lot of these areas of work, it's quite difficult to fund a large staff, and so you can take a chance on people who might not have the right qualifications, might not have the same opportunities, and they can get a way into this industry they otherwise wouldn't be introduced to.
I mean, Chris, would you be comfortable depriving people like Charlie of actually having the opportunity to work in some of these very competitive industries where they are less likely to offer you any money?
I'm a complete supporter of work experience. That's why the bill has a 4-week limit. So 4 weeks of work experience, as Charlie so correctly puts, to enable employers and employees, potential employees, to get to know one another, see how it works. 4 weeks of proper work experience. After that point, someone should be paid. And indeed, if on day one of that they're doing actual work, then they should be paid from that point. But I'm completely supportive of work experience, hence why the bill is structured in that way, to have a 4-week work experience period within it.
Right. I mean, the problem is, Charlie, that for people on low incomes who couldn't afford to live without any sort of pay for 4 weeks, that puts internships beyond their reach, which would actually, this bill, level the playing field.
Yeah, that is a legitimate concern. I think there is certainly an inequality of access to many of these internships and opportunities. But the reason the opportunity to expand this should be to reduce the cost of living and the rent prices and the cost of living that goes alongside these issues. Young people and students, they get about 10 months off between their first year and their last year of university in summer and Christmas holidays. If they work hard in minimum wage jobs, then they'll have the opportunity to save up that cash and spend it on 6 or 8 weeks in an unpaid internship. I've done that a few times. It's helped me brilliantly, and I don't want to be paid a minimum wage in these jobs. I want to gain skills, experiences and contacts, which will help me a lot more than $7.50 an hour.
Right. I mean, isn't that the point, actually, Chris? I mean, you've tried this twice before, haven't you? I mean, what makes you think this will be different?
I think there's a definite move, and public opinion is on side. 3/4 of people believe there should be a ban on unpaid work experience. Crucially, 96% of people say they couldn't afford to take unpaid internships. So even if the arguments around equality, dignity, fairness, respect don't float your boat, just on a question of talent as an organisation, why wouldn't you want to draw from the broadest and the best talent pool possible rather than just 4% of people who, good fortune and good luck to them, could do it for free?
Where do you stand, Gaby?
I wish him all the best of luck, frankly. I don't see why anyone could possibly object to this. I mean, if you're allowing for people's ability to have work experience, to get a taste of the firm. You know, a month is long enough for any employer to know what you're like, whether it works with you, and it's long enough for people to put it on their CVs, because obviously people often intern just to be able to demonstrate later on to another employer that they've had experience in that industry. A month is long enough for that, and I think, particularly in our industry, you know, it's very difficult for people to come to London and do internships because they just can't afford to live here while they're doing it. And employers could do much more to support people's costs of accommodation while they do it. But you know, I think it's a no-brainer.
Does it need legislation though? I suppose that's the point. I mean, the government said they were launching a crackdown on unpaid internships anyway. They were sending out warning letters to companies, setting up enforcement teams. Is that the way to go, to sort of shame companies into it?
No, but I think we've found that doesn't really work, and then you'll always have companies that will get around that. I don't understand why the government... It needs friends at the minute. You know, Theresa May talks when she came into Downing Street, feels like 10 years ago now, said, you know, I want to help the just about managers.
Yes, and the burning injustices on the steps of Downing Street.
Beyond 4 weeks is exploitation. The business knows by then, as Gaby says, we know if these kids are any good or not. Pay them a fair wage.
Right. I mean, that's the point, isn't it, Charlie? It is exploitation, because if you are being given proper training as part of this internship, that's one thing. But if you are photocopying, making the tea, running around, you are basically slave labour and you're not being paid for it.
I don't think most unpaid internships in serious businesses and areas of work do revolve around making tea and doing photocopying. In the unpaid internships I've done some serious work, and I felt like I've really contributed to the work.
So
the
shouldn't you
company
be paid
does.
for that?
Well, I mean, I could be in the future, and the return on investment on the unpaid internship might be brilliant for me. By doing unpaid internships in media, for example, I've been able to do things like this, broadcast and write for national newspapers.
Oh, well, it'll launched your career, Charlie, I can assure you, being on the Daily Politics. No, thank you, Gaby. It will definitely not do me. I mean, Chris Holmes, there is also a point that if you are given something constructive to do, and Charlie said in his experience, most of the internships that he's done, you are given something that you can use, a skill, you are trained properly. And in that sense, after a month or so, maybe longer, rather than putting a limit on it, people would be able to earn money perhaps by getting a proper job.
I think that if it's work experience, 4 weeks is long enough to establish that point. I think we've already run the statistics. If we consider some of the comments that I got from people who've done it, they describe it as a shameful period in their life. They say they start to doubt their self-worth and their dignity. Should we be having people feeling like this when they're contributing to work, contributing to a product? Even for the 4% who can afford to do it for free, quite frankly, if they're lucky enough to have family money, when you work, part of knowing that you've done a good day's work is remuneration at the end of it. And at the national level, if the government is serious about social mobility, which I believe they are, then I really believe they need to get serious about this bill.
All right. Charlie Peters, do you think you could support it?
I don't think I could. I don't think the right response to this issue is to reduce opportunity. We should be looking at reducing the cost of living instead.
All right. Charlie and Chris, thank you both for coming in. Well, actually, you didn't come in, but you did go into the studio for us. Thank you, Charlie.